That kind of shirt. Roger. That's pretty amazing. Where am I? Huh? Oh, yeah. Oh, it's going to be. It depends on the type of client. I really don't know.
Hello. Thank you everybody for coming tonight. We're going to get started in just a little while. We're waiting for 2 panelists. So thank you for your patience.
Not a one.
I've also been bounced in there. No, I was in bed. And I was like,
Oh, wow. Yeah. I can't even imagine.
oh yeah, it's sold out. They were very excited. Yeah, they were really
You know, when they talk about our childhood, just all of it, everything that we inherited from those ancestors.
I'm not allowed to talk to her, so I said,
Oh, right.
They forget a lot of it sometimes. It wasn't that long ago that they practiced it in public, right?
Don't show it to me.
spend a lot of money.
Oh, well. I would imagine it's like overwhelming. Oh. Yeah. Everybody got dropped off, so. Oh, relative, yeah. That was by design, right? For purpose, that we were all separated. Like to take
I also like literally
Talking points?
Today I got to talk about garbage. No, for me it's just mostly actually I've done some stuff with it.
Saw your TED Talk.
Am I going to talk about what? I don't know, you got the questions. What are you going to talk about? Typically from the government office? All right. I know that. You're combo or in Sons, according
actually friends, and you actually told me just now. But, you know, the license on you know, you can put them out.
Yeah, I got told actually. Yep. I know, it's. Yeah, and a half.
You fine.
Yeah, today we had a stated meeting. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was great.
CPT.
I don't blame you. Most people, they get out of it. I figure we'll see. Some people are like, you know, well, I was a staffer for like 18 months. Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. Margarita night. No,
Let me
that
grab
was
one.
margarita.
Do you mind?
I don't know about that. I just know she went straight to Gail's office doing something, and now she's in Giovanni's office and she leads policy. All I know is that she's getting maximum.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's what I said.
Does Hubby still have the store in my district, you know, the coffee shop?
He's like a minor partner, like a very, very small partner. If you see, they like whatever, they got like a different name, and like there's two guys that do most of the work. There's two guys that do most of the work. He's like a maybe, I don't know what his percentage is, 10%. Yeah. What's your percentage of
That is true.
what's going on? All the stuff you're working on. Which one? No, I mean like you're also involved in Unlock, right? Unlock. What about it? I know you gotta keep it quiet.
I haven't said anything.
Keep it down, Jesse. Keep it down. No, I don't even. Tori and I only met a couple times. But you know what's exciting is that it's gonna be like, yeah. But you know the thing that, and I hope that we're all gonna talk about this today is that wait, what?
She said that? I was on a panel with her about legacy at the beginning of the month. She did not say that. Yes. She said that there was no
Oh, you
exact
musician?
term legacy in the MRTA.
Oh, okay.
That doesn't mean that she said that there's
Oh, okay.
no. She said that they are not specifically
TV
named as
show,
being
yeah.
in MRTA. And
I used to do
think about
that
it,
when I wasn't as a kid,
Constitution
though.
is that. Exactly. So I mean, that is a fact.
I'm still a SAG member, technically.
Oh, I also just want something.
There you go.
And so let's say, here's the other thing. Well, let's say you legitimately, right, got picked up, whatever. But let's say you need the charges. So because you don't.
Oh, in order to be on?
And you already know, how do we get ACD, ROR?
ACDs should be counted. No. They said that there was going to
I
be
just wanted
for it.
I wanted to get used to it because I wasn't sure.
I heard that ACDs were going to be counted.
I think they should be. You know what? I can't tell you like I'll bet my life that that's true.
It says a conviction, straight up.
I mean, I have the legislation. When we spoke to not Tremaine, but when we spoke to neither, when we spoke to Ruben, no, not Ruben, Adam. Yeah, Adam. Through this was in the bar association. He said it was wrong to include.
Madam Chair.
Hey, how about you?
Good.
Hey there.
I feel like I'm like, I should know you already.
We do like
You're on,
kind
I'm
of
on
know
your
each
nail
other.
list.
Exactly. Like I think we like been in like spaces, but we never quite got to work together on something like whatever. You're in a way better place.
I am busy, but yeah, it's good.
How could she get bored? This is just starting up.
I need it.
She's like it's like early stages of the startup. All this time you couldn't go? Yeah. Gotta watch it. Be careful, be careful. But listen, I'm not leaving early. I'm not gonna leave early. Yeah. I had another run and I'm like, what's my appointment?
Don't you have to CB3?
I do.
Okay, I told you I'm on your mail list. I don't know, like since.
CB3, we got some issues.
So I'm CB3 Brooklyn. So I just I get it. Okay, probably done on CB3. And so I get everybody's CB3 stuff. Yeah. So a lot of the things that they deal with, we were dealing with.
Is he at the start of the event?
He can, I mean, he can join. I was like, don't try to play me. Right there. You gotta see. We can't all go.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Downtown Cannabis, community conversation. About the emerging cannabis business landscape here in New York City. First, a quick message from the Sheen Center, who were kind enough to give us their space to do this event tonight. Take a moment to identify your closest emergency exits. Restrooms are to the right and then to the left through the lobby. There is a very strict no standing rule, so please find a seat if you have not already. Who's pointing?
Plenty up there.
Oh, yes, and there are plenty of seats upstairs if you'd like to spread out and have some room. This meeting is being live streamed on the CB2 Facebook page and will live there afterwards if you want to watch it again. Some of you received question cards when you came in. Patricia Laria, the vice chair of my committee, and Amy Brenna, committee member, will be circulating to collect those from you. Time permits, we will ask our panelists to answer those questions. Let's see what else, sorry. Please be respectful and quiet so that we can all benefit from the amazing information we're going to learn here tonight. All right, so my name is Mara Fitzgerald. I'm the chair of Equity, Race, and Justice for Community Board 2, Manhattan. Thank you. In March of last year, New York made history with the passage of the MRTA. We'll find out what that is in a minute. This legislation laid the groundwork for legal adult use cannabis sales in the 5 boroughs. Tonight, we will discuss the different types of cannabis businesses, the process to obtain a license, and the community board's role in that process, and what all of that means for our downtown community. Tonight is made possible through support of our sponsor, Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine, who you will see later. He'll come say a few words, and his amazing staff and deputies, Aya Keefe, Keisha Sutton-James, and Keisha Smith. Tonight was a collaborative effort of 4 Manhattan community boards. I'd like to thank CB1 Chair Tammy Meltzer, CB3 Chair Paul Rangel, Jeffrey LaFrancois, Chair of CB4, for having their boards join us as co-hosts. I'd also like to thank CB2 District Manager Bob Gormley, who did all of the behind the scenes and got us up and running for tonight and our live stream and everything. So thank you, Bob. But I'd like to give a really extra huge special thanks to my chair, Community Board 2 Chairperson Janine Kiley, who is unfortunately unable to be with us tonight, but her steadfast support and trust in us, I mean, we wouldn't even be here without Janine. So round of applause for Janine in absence. The community board representatives on stage are those who, like myself, have taken the lead in the cannabis work at their boards. And they are Mariama James from Community Board 1, Leslie Williams from Community Board 4 in Chelsea. And Paul Rangel from Community Board 3. He's the chair of Community Board 3. So this is our first panel tonight. We're going to have a part 2, and we're going to bring up another panelist. This evening, we will have Tremaine Wright, chair of the New York State Cannabis Control Board. District 2 Council Member Carlina Rivera. Cannabis attorney, law professor, and advocate Christina Buccola. And founder, CEO of Campo Amor and Sons, LLC, Jesse Campo Amor. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight and sharing your knowledge with us. Would you please take a moment to tell us a little about yourselves and what it is you do?
Hello? Okay, so I'm on. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tremaine Wright. I'm currently serving as the chair of the Cannabis Control Board. I'm a former New York State Assembly member, small business owner, and I'm an attorney by training. I am charged with, the Cannabis Control Board, we are charged with approving the regulations as well as licensing, and we work hand in hand with the Office of Cannabis Management, which manages the day-to-day activities and the processing of the licensing that is coming forward. And so, and I guess nowadays my job is also to do the market tour. So thank you for having me tonight.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carlina Rivera. I'm a New York City Council member representing the East Side. I was born and raised in the Lower East Side in the LES. Yes, okay. Some families here. Last term, actually, this is my second term as a council member. I was chair of the Committee on Hospitals last term during a global pandemic. As you can imagine, I learned a ton. But as you also know, a lot of social inequity within the healthcare system, which is definitely related to the discussion I think that we're going to have today. And then now I am chair of the Committee on Criminal Justice. So I've also passed legislation regarding small business support, entrepreneurial support, and I want to make sure that the city plays a very responsible role in kind of this emerging industry and always, always, always focused on equity, economic development, and supporting those that are justice involved and disproportionately affected by that war on drugs.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Christina Buccola, and I'm an attorney of almost 20 years, transactional based. And I came to cannabis in 2014 because I thought it was a potential remedy to offset my dad's advancing Parkinson's. That led me to be the general counsel of High Times. From there, I was a partner in a grow, and for the last almost 10 years, I've had a practice dedicated to cannabis, maybe a little less than that. In any event, I work across several states, and one of the states I do a lot of work in is Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, I represent quite a number of legacy market participants, small businesses, and social equity applicants. I was part of one of the groups that helped to pass MRTA last year. That's a Start Smart campaign. I'm a law professor at Pace University, where I teach a class that I organized and thought of about cannabis legalization, and it's taught from a lens of social equity and the war on drugs, and how do we see legalization as a remedy to that. It's really good here to be with you tonight, long-standing resident of Community Board 2. Thanks for having me.
Good evening. My name is Jesse Smith Campo Amor. I'm currently the CEO and founder of a government relations business strategy firm called Campo Amor and Sons, LLC. Prior to that, for the last 2 years, I served as the Deputy Secretary of Intergovernmental Affairs for Governor Andrew Cuomo. And a large part of my portfolio during that job was to actually help negotiate, draft, and author, and eventually pass the MRTA. And so now, part of the work that I'm doing now in the private sector is working with Legacy and some other operators to make sure we have a representative, diverse, culturally competent group of operators in this market. So it's good to see some friendly faces on the stage and in the crowd as well. looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. So we're going to jump right in to the questions. Patricia and Amy, if you've collected any questions, please bring them up to us.
Our first question to the panelists tonight is, what is the MRTA?
So the MRTA is our Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act. It is what was passed last year, March 31st of 2020. Last year was 2021. Sorry. There's a lot of talk. I do a lot of talk, sorry. So skipping a year, but yes, of 2021. It is the legal framework for which we're using to create the regulations that are going to govern cannabis in New York State. It was designed through a social equity lens and also shifting gears from enforcement to public health. So we're using that as our guide and guardrails as we develop the regulations that are slowly being rolled out to help improve the existing medical marijuana program here in New York State, as well as to set up the framework and to roll out the adult use program. A large part of it, and I'll let someone else speak, was the decriminalization work, which began in 2019 with decriminalization, and then the legalization, which followed 2 years later. We're definitely trying to address the need to expunge records and to make sure people are in a position so that they can live their lives fully, whether they want to participate in a cannabis market or not. This was the work that led the conversations for legalization, and so we just want to make sure that that is a central component to the conversation as we move it forward. Thank you.
And in addition to that, New York is unprecedented because 40% of the revenues, the taxation revenues, will go to community reinvestment. And that will be government agencies and not-for-profits that look in the communities that have been most devastated by the war on drugs and take monies from that fund and plug it into programming in those communities. This has also happened in California and Illinois, but to have 40% set aside is pretty remarkable.
What are the types of businesses the MRTA allows?
Okay, so we have, from soup to nuts, we have nursery, where those are the tissue matter, small plants, seeds, and then we have cultivation, where you're actually growing the plant. That involves minimal processing, like trimming. Then there's a processor's license, and this is when you turn the material into something else, whether that's a vape pen or an edible or a concentrate. And then there's a distributor license. That distributor license takes product from one licensee in the regulated scheme to another. From there, we also have, as you can tell, there are a lot of licenses. There's a co-op license, which has to follow certain co-op principles. We have a micro license, which actually handles everything from seed to sale on a smaller basis. And so what does seed to sale mean? That means you're handling everything from literally the seed before it's even in the ground to where you're retailing it. There's also a delivery license. If you have ever used a beeper or a phone or the internet to order anything to your house in the last 30 years, you're familiar with this. There's retail outlets, which are dispensaries, there's social consumption, and there's also testing. I think I hit all of them. That's all 9. And interestingly enough, should I go there? Should I talk about the lack of vertical integration, or is it boring? Go there. It's boring. Oh, I'm listening to you. You two direct me.
Let's go.
Okay, so New York has been really, really intentional about splitting up that supply chain. So there's supply side and then there's consumer side. And this is because what we've seen in other states, that there are a few really well-funded companies that end up controlling the entire supply chain, and it really doesn't allow other people to enter the market. So New York is really intentional about it. With the exception of the micro-business, which I just discussed, and the registered organizations, which are the existing medical providers, which I don't know anyone in here if you are, but you know if you are. Those are the only two types of licenses that are allowed to be vertically integrated. There is this concept of stacking certain licenses that are on the supply side, like the nursery, like the cultivation, and the processing, and the distribution. But none of those can have an interest, or if you're in any kind of retail outlet, most importantly, or social consumption outlet, or delivery license. And so that is another really interesting thing about our licensing, and this is, I think that this will certainly ensure more participants are able to join the industry than if we didn't have this.
So for context, when she talks about the medical registered organizations, I believe in 2015 the state passed the Compassionate Care Act, and that allowed for a medical cannabis program, and there were 10. The first 5 and then another 5, but 10 verticalized operators. These are what we call MSOs. These are multi-state operators, very big companies. Part of the challenge, as folks understand, is because it's still not federally legal, I can't go to a commercial lender to finance this project. I mean, finance my license, finance the building out my license. And so, for licenses that involve, capital-intensive investments, to Christina's point, a vertical operation becomes cost prohibitive. And it actually alienates folks that don't have access to massive amounts of money from being part of the program. And that's reflective in the lack of diversity that we see across the country. I believe of all the multi-state operators, there's one black-owned of all of them. You're looking at an industry that less than 7% of people are black and brown and women. And so by breaking the vertical, we actually gave it the opportunity for more people to have access to the market, and I think that's a plus.
And
Can I have a follow-up
absolutely.
question?
Oh, yeah.
Based on what you've said, how will this integrate with the medical marijuana? Will it impact usage or access?
So the question was, how will this impact the medical marijuana program as it exists today? One of the things that we've been trying to do since the board was constituted was to stand up the medical program. Unfortunately, there are less than 200,000 patients registered as participants in the medical program in New York State at this point. One of the things that came to our attention over the years is that it was cost prohibitive because, as everyone's identified already, it is not federally regulated. It's not federally legalized, therefore your insurance does not cover it. So one of the first actions that we took as a board was to incorporate whole flower into the medical program. So we're trying, in which we anticipated would lower the costs for participation. Whole flower is cheaper than any of the other processed products which are being offered in the medical program. It's been too short a period of time to really have a say if that was enough for us to stand it up. I think a larger part of the work is going to be for us to engage medical professionals so that they know and understand that they can utilize the plant and they can prescribe it. We also increase the types of practitioners who could prescribe marijuana products. And so anyone who can write a prescription can also prescribe cannabis for their patients. It's no longer a set list of ailments that qualify a patient. We've really broadened it. If the doctor or the practitioner thinks that this is going to be helpful for their patient, they have the opportunity to prescribe it. So what we're trying to do is create a space in which people are able to really obtain medical professional advice and to utilize it under the care and guidance of their medical practitioners, and that we really emphasize wellness. Additionally, what we will need to see are supports in our medical schools so that there are coursework to support endocannabinoid system studies so that doctors are better educated about what happens to a system and what's happening inside the body if someone uses cannabis products. And so we know that we have to have partnership. We have already spoken with the Secretary of State. They're on board with it, so we are really trying to expand it. It is not something that is being laid to the wayside, and we would really like to see people who need and or want some guidance and assistance continuing their relationship with medical professionals.
Part of the problem, I think, and we kind of seen it, I'm sorry, I kicked all those, is that, a lot of the 10 operators that came in on the medical program really used medical as an excuse and opportunity to get in because they wanted to be part of the adult use program, right? When you look at of the 10 operators, I think only 3 of them actually even cultivated, right? Like 3 of them.
just to be fair, currently, all are cultivating. However, up until this year, only 3. So so it is with eyes wide open that I say 10 are cultivating, but up until this year, only 3 cultivated. So a large part of our work is to really impress upon actors and participants that we want a medical program that is robust in our state, that we do want people to have access to medical care throughout the state, and that includes cannabis. And that's a heavy lift, but it is the work that we are engaged in.
So I just want to bring it from a very local perspective, because I realize like these are our community boards and they deal with a lot of hyperlocal questions, and we ourselves receive a ton of questions and inquiries about this industry and what it means. And so the first thing I'll say is, in regards to medical suppliers, clearly they will become recreational suppliers as well. And so that Columbia Care that you see on 14th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue that sells... The what?
They just rebranded as the Cannabis, so they may have just
They rebranded. Good for them. I'm sure there's some legal opportunity that they're taking advantage of there. But I will say they're also going to be selling recreationally as well, right? So you're going to see that a lot. When it comes to, well, how do we make sure that we're pushing the social equity piece while getting to all the issues that might come up, you might have also heard like the mayor say we're going to start growing marijuana on top of public housing. Because of the very federal challenges and concerns that were mentioned today, you cannot just start to grow marijuana on top of public housing roofs because, again, of the federal challenges. But one thing that the city has done is they have invested, right now it's about $4.8 million, to make sure that there's robust community outreach and information brought to communities, specifically those disproportionately affected, to understand kind of the business model, how to pursue it, and how to navigate what could be a very bureaucratic process. And to get to that bureaucracy, I'll also say you've heard all the kind of the chain and how it was broken up. That's also going to bring in oversight, investigation, and enforcement from all levels of government. And so we'll certainly hear from the state, since they are the ones that pass the legislation ultimately. But, you know, small business services, NYPD, Department of Environmental Protection, the fire department, the whole alphabet soup of agencies will be involved in this industry, because with all of these businesses and types of businesses that will be emerging, there will be a ton of regulation. And some of that will feel a little bit onerous and cumbersome. Some of it will definitely be warranted. And so, of course, the city's role is to make sure that we're doing so in a way that is equitable, smart, responsible, and all of those things. So just wanted to kind of mention some of that.
And I do want to also just piggyback on that statement. We have been in conversations with New York City regarding what role they could play and how they might want to approach the rollout of the cannabis industry. They are very clear that one of the things that we've asked for are assistance in, one, outreach. So even just having the borough presidents reach out to their community boards, or to have the city utilizing some of their existing contract partnerships to help do outreach. They've been on board and helpful. The technical services for small business development, that is SBS, they've made themselves available to assist with our cannabis our budding entrepreneurs. The Brooklyn Public Library, sorry, Manhattan, but they're doing a Power Up business plan competition. I believe Queens is doing the same thing, and the prize is $20,000 for the winner. So the city partners are working. They've also agreed to come back with a plan, with a system, or rather what system they would like to use for either community boards or some other arm to give community input to applicants that must have authorization from municipalities when they submit their applications. So the city is on board with that. And I've also brought up to our city partners that one of the problems that New York will uniquely face is that many of us live in apartment buildings where smoking is not acceptable. That doesn't mean that you can't use any cannabis, but in anything that is federally subsidized, that becomes a problem. So it's any cannabis in those spaces. And so we've also presented to them that we need assistance in helping to identify safer consumption spaces so that they can address those problems. So these are things that the city is not blind to. The city is aware of it. They're working on solutions, and the most recently announced investment of $4.8 million is going to go a long way in helping us to come up with solutions for many of these concerns.
If I can just say two other points to Madam Chair's point. So one thing, alternative consumption spaces. That's where the consumption lounge comes in, right? And that's why it's so important that if we're really trying to get our cannabis industry up and running, that these licenses are granted sooner than later and established pretty early on. And, you know, the licenses right now don't really allow for edibles, so we might want to look into that because there are a lot of different ways to consume cannabis. The other thing that Chairperson Wright said was where the community will have input. And that's because the community doesn't have input on every kind of license. Remember when we talked about supply side licenses? Community doesn't have input there. It's the stuff that's consumer facing. So the retail spots and the consumption lounges, those will be open for community board input. And I suspect that will look a lot like the SLA process that each community board has.
So, I mean, look, I think from a city perspective, I think there's one thing, I kind of talked about it with my fellow panel members. I mean, I don't know if you guys experienced this walking here today. There are probably, you know, within 3 city blocks, there's not a bodega, deli you could not walk into right now and purchase a cannabis, right? And those guys currently are legal operators. And the reason why that's of concern to me is if there are people that want to pursue this opportunity, go through the process of filling out the application, working with consultants, working on acquiring real estate, they're competing against people that are not paying taxes, that are not compliant, that really might have product that has not gone through any testing standards. So we don't know from a public health perspective if they're safe or not. But you know, the value of those licenses really won't be that valuable if we don't enforce and kind of hamper down some of the illegal operations that's going on. And I think that's really a responsibility for the city to drive. I know that's a costly endeavor, and so they're probably going to need some help from the state funding that operation. But I think that's a really important piece. I think the other thing that folks are referring to, and I think it's important to understand, if I was a successful legacy operator, right? When I say the word legacy, the folks understand that's operating before, you know, people call that black market, I refer to as legacy. If I was a successful legacy operator, there are still skills that I've never done well or that I need help with in the legal market to be successful, right? For example, I've never done 280 tax compliance. I've never done conventional marketing and advertising. I've never done a complex real estate deal, right? And so even those folks that have success in the legacy market are going to need support with technical and legal elements to be successful in the legal market. And so although there's a lot of focus on capital and deployment of capital, there really is legal and technical support that we have to think about how we use our resources in the city to help out. How do we use our CUNY law students? How do we use our public zoning and land use experts to help out on these fronts? These are going to be the ways to really lower barriers to entry and make a difference in people being successful.
So one thing that Jesse brings up that, I mean, everyone on this panel has brought up and we need to really stress is capital. And it is really difficult to raise money in cannabis. I've raised not hundreds of millions, but tens of millions of dollars over the last couple of years with people in Massachusetts. And some of those raises go for over 18 months, which is really, really long, because it's really tough. And everyone's like, this sounds sexy. I have the best product. I have the best branding. Everybody's lined up. And then when you go to see if the doorknobs are warm or if people will sign a term sheet, they're nowhere to be. So part of, I think, underwriting how the city gets involved or how the state gets involved is where are we getting capital from? It's great that there's this $200 million debt fund that will go for the first 100 to 200 adult use or conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses. But people who don't qualify for that? How are they going to raise capital? And so maybe focusing on certain types of licenses that have a lower financial entry point might be really, really important to deploying equity measures. They've done that in Massachusetts. We don't have to talk about the success of Massachusetts' equity plan. New York's is designed very differently, but timing around licenses is a way that we could go about that.
We're going to get more into some of these things a little further down the agenda, so we could go to Paul now for the next question.
Only because you're from Community Board 3 and I'm from Community Board 3 in Brooklyn. No, I'm only kidding. Go ahead.
Thank you. Everyone's hinted at the regulations already. How will these businesses be regulated, if there's any specifics out there already?
How are they going to be regulated? They're regulated by the Office of Cannabis Management and the regulations which we are currently producing and that the Cannabis Control Board will pass ultimately. So that's the long and short answer. I'm sorry, that's the long answer. The short answer is also you're subject to whatever local zoning laws may exist in the municipality in which you are participating or where you house your business. So general overarching, it comes from us, but local, which are zoning issues, happen at the local level, and so we listen to the locality when it comes to that.
I mean, one thing I'd add, and this is important for all of you guys to understand, is that, so the way the process works is the board will put out proposed regulations and then give the public a set of time to review, opine, and actually share thoughts with the Cannabis Control Board and OCM about that. And I think we're currently in that review process now for the retail. And so this is actually a critical moment for stakeholders like yourselves, if you have strong opinions, strong feelings about the regulations, to come back to the board and say, maybe you guys need to think about it a little bit differently, right? And so, and I'm sure the chair would welcome these kind of...
Currently, the conditional adult use dispensary license regulations are out for comment. They're in their this is the first comment period. It's a 60-day window. So please, if you are interested, go online to cannabis.ny.gov. You will be able to find a copy of the regulations. There's also a tab there for you to submit comments, should you have any comments. And I think that we also have out in this is its second round, it's the medical program regulations. So those, I think we did 2 meetings ago, and so they're in like their last 45 days. So they've been edited to reflect the comments that we received during the first round.
And I strongly encourage you guys to take that opportunity to do that. I mean, this first round of retail dispensary licenses is an exciting opportunity, but I'm somebody who's struggling to find people that qualify. I mean, the criteria makes sense, I get it, but it's hard, you have to find somebody that's socially justice involved, owns 10% of a business that was profitable for 2 years. That's a hard person to find. And a lot of people in our community either were ACD'd, right, or ROR'd, so I don't know necessarily if that qualifies under the conviction standard.
Is that a conviction that you walked away with? Then you need to say it. So what I also want to tell people is these are regulations. If any of you have ever dealt with the government before, you know that regulations change, that sometimes it's that there are interpretations. Please, if you think that you qualify, apply. Get ready. Submit your application. Don't sit on the sidelines and say, you know what, I'm not really sure if this conviction that I'm carrying around in my back pocket that everybody knows I have, that I've been putting on applications for 15 years up until about 4 years ago when it was no longer allowed to be asked. If it qualifies, just put it in and let somebody say no. And then we can move forward from there, because that is the challenge. And also, in the world of us raising money, I know and understand that people want to say, oh, let's come up with a grant, let's come up with this. This went through the legislative process. This $200 million was not something that OCM or any other agency was just authorized to do out of the blue, or that we are empowered to do unilaterally. It goes through a legislative process. And just as an FYI, our state session is about to end in June. So while we might want another crack at the nut, we might want another opportunity, the reality is this is the one that we're working with in this moment. Give us your comments, push forward on the issues and concerns that you have. Make sure your voices are heard in the process, and through the process means submit your comment. And then we can use insights from that to, one, update the existing regulations, but also to help model what future opportunities look like. We know that this is not the be-all, end-all. This is an opportunity that probably looks most like a franchise option. Most people entering into this space don't need a franchise option. We're okay with that. This is the first opportunity. There are no limit on the number of licenses in New York State. Let me say that twice. There are no limits on the number of licenses in New York State. So we don't have to be the first, you don't have to be the 10th, you don't even have to be in year one. If you are going to apply and you are like, you know what, I'm just gonna take me a year to get things together, then it takes you a year to get things together. But what we want is a successful business, and we want you to have an opportunity to participate. We have been mindful of cost in the existing licenses, which we are offering already. Just to give you some clarity, those who sell CBDs, they have a $300 annual registration fee. Those who are growing is a $1,500 license. Those who are processing hemp, these are cannabinoid hemps, just to give you some color, it's $5,600. So as you see, these are not astronomical pricing, and we're not trying to follow the model of other states wherein people have to spend $100,000. We are limited in the law to cover the costs to operate and to maintain. We are not here to gouge. So do not listen to professionals who come and tell you that they want you to enter into long-standing, very expensive retainer agreements. There are a lot of people who knocking on doors, especially of those people who operate CBD businesses, saying, you need us. We want to charge you $5,600 to help you get ready, and it's going to be $5,600 every month. Don't do it. It's not, they can't glean anything from the stars about regulations that you have not had access to. And if they are telling you that they have some special information, I'm going to say that they're probably not telling you the truth, and you might want to reconsider that relationship. So let's all just get ourselves geared up and prepared. There are lots of services within this city to help people who've never run a business to write business plans and to begin to understand all of the layers of process that they need to get through. And in our most recent budget, I just heard somebody mention the 280E tax code. We were forbidden federally from charging the expenses related to costs for cannabis businesses. Now we have the opportunity to deduct the cost of goods under our state law. We just passed that in this year's budget a couple of weeks ago. No, that's a big deal. Businesses need that. And I'm going to tell you, larger businesses traditionally do better at expensing it than our smaller businesses. So that means we really need our technical services people to be well prepared and positioned to help people understand how to move their monies so that they can take advantage of those tax benefits. So yes, it's important for us to have it, but if it's only the big GEs that get to take advantage of it, we've missed the mark. So we really need our professional services team to be well poised and ready to take advantage of it, and to have sophisticated conversations about what tax outcomes are needed for all of our small businesses. Because that's really all that matters when they set up a business. Nobody cares if you want to call yourself for-profit, not-for-profit, LLC, C Corp, S. Nobody cares. The only answer is what is going to be your tax consequence at the end of the day. So we just need those kind of professionals to come on board and to be a part of the technical services team to help our small businesses avail themselves of the benefits that are being rolled out for them. So thank you. Sorry, get off my mic.
Still on the topic of enforcement. So we're still there. What are the rules? What are the rules for, that's louder, public consumption and sale, and how will those be enforced?
Right now, there are no legal adult use sales. You will have people tell you that they're legal. You will see, there's a lot of people out there that are saying the way that they are dispensing cannabis is legal, but when there is a financial transaction, it is not legal. I don't know, enforcement right now, you know, it doesn't look like very much. And part of that, I think, is because one of the underpinnings of MRTA was to address the fact that the war on drugs was pretty violent and, you know, at the hands of NYPD. So to then enable NYPD to crack down on a new industry that admittedly is going through some growing pains wasn't the best setup. But again, there are no legal adult use sales at the moment. Medical sales, yes, and this is what a wonderful time to enter our medical program.
So public usage by.
Oh, the public uses. Okay, so the general rule is everywhere you smoke a cigarette, you can smoke a joint, except you cannot smoke a joint in your car. You cannot smoke, or you cannot smoke in restaurants that allow smoking. You can't smoke. Sometimes they allow smoking at cigar bars that are outfitted and you can close the room. None of that. Membership clubs, you can smoke cannabis, but the membership club has to be everybody that's in the club is working at the club and contributing to the operation of the club. So you might see some clubs out there right now that does not fit the description of the club that is envisioned under MRTA. You can't smoke in parks, and you can smoke in private residences.
And I just want to add, because I know that I usually am contacted by at least two kinds of people, right? A constituent who actually asks these very questions. So we hope for those of you who had those questions that was a great answer. Thank you. And also, what about enforcement? I've had constituents like send me videos where they go in and they buy the illegal weed at the smoke shop. Like, this is all really, what? I know, but these are the DMs that I get. So it's a very glamorous job. So I understand that people have questions. They want justice. They want people to operate by the rules. Clearly, like, this is, I guess, like, pun intended, like, not fully baked. There are a lot of things that are still being determined. We are, as you heard, everyone is inviting public comment. And then for the business owner, it's like, you know, that commitment to racial justice is going to be so, so important. And I know many people have asked, you know, Massachusetts looks a certain way, California looks a certain way. New York is making history. And we will look a little bit like that, but we're also going to look unique, because that's who we are. We're New York City. So for the business owners, I would just say that I understand it's also very frustrating the access to capital, understanding that right now access to real estate seems like it's kind of being gobbled up by, like, venture capital backed people who are taking away opportunities. I do think that there is room for perhaps maybe complementary legislation, but certainly city funded programs of technical expertise, navigating, you know, kind of the business entrepreneurial path. And then also, like, thinking about whether we need to create a green zone map so that interested operators can easily and, like, clearly navigate the real estate market. So these are some ideas that we're thinking. Clearly, we're also going to need reporting to make sure that the city isn't just talking about MWBE goals, that we're actually meeting those marks. And then, you know, of course, just figuring out how we fund way more than $4.8 million to do proper outreach and community engagement.
So I want to give flowers to the Madam Chair and to her colleagues, because I think they're doing a great job taking feedback, taking input, and like, so I want to give them their credit, right? It's like, you know, they got one of the hardest jobs in America right now, and you got to really give them, you know, work with them to get this done. But by the numbers, we still just have a lot more work to do, and especially when it comes to the criminal justice issue, right? Like, when you look at the arrests of marijuana-related arrests in New York City in 2020, 94% of those people were people of color, right? And so although the numbers are coming down, I mean, I don't know if we want to clap about that, but it's a problem. It's a problem. It's a problem, right? And we have to figure out how to make some advances on that. And I think the more we can find these forums, work together to figure out how to absorb, bring people in from the legacy market into the legal market. This is the only state in America that said, let's find ways, potentially entry points, versus let's build bridges, not moats, right? Every other state in America said, you know, in California, in order to get the law passed, they had to convince PTA parents and constituents, if you had a cannabis conviction, you couldn't work or own a license in this industry. right? That's a very different approach than we're taking in New York. And I think those are the kind of differences that the Madam Chair and her colleagues are working on that will make a difference down the road. But we need to give it time. We just need to work.
So I just want to chime in on the enforcement concern. That is something that we're hearing all over the state, and I don't want people to think that it's falling upon deaf ears. It is very deliberate, as already has been identified, that we did not want to begin this rollout with a bunch of police action going out, trying to arrest people who, one, may not know what the law is or might have been getting confusing information. So we really are trying to do education first. We have sent out cease and desist letters to those entities and enterprises that we know are operating illegally. I believe a second batch of notices have gone out, and as of April, tax and finance has been empowered to begin taking action against these entities. However, as already been identified, the community boards are going to have an opportunity to chime in on applicants, on a licenses, a potential licensee's application. You have the power to keep track. You have the power to note who are bad actors in your community, and you have the power to tell us that you know that you have been in contact with them over the past 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 months, and that they continue to behave in a particular way. You already do it when you process other licenses, so continue to do your job. Community boards are empowered because you are the community, you know the neighborhood, you know the actors. That's why the voice is important. So I just want to empower you and encourage you to do the good work, continue doing the good work that you already do, and do not hesitate to share the information and things that you learn with us, because that's really going to be the guide for our work. Thank you.
I want to jump ahead, actually. We have lots of questions, but I know that you can't stay much longer. And I know that everybody wants to find out, how do I get into this business? How can I be a part of this? So can you give us just a snapshot of the steps it takes to obtain a license?
Complete your application. No, that's it, really. So honestly, people need a business plan. People need to be prepared to operate in this space, so they need to be educating themselves at this time. They need to be they need to go through every step that's necessary to build out a business plan. So I mentioned at the beginning that the Brooklyn Public Library and the Queens Public Library operate a business plan writing competition. They call it Power Up. You have the museum, 34th and 5th? It's Science and, I can't think of the proper name, but it's 34th and 5th. They help with, it's a CUNY building, but they help you write your business plans. People need to know and understand exactly what they're getting into so that they are successful, because I can tell you, as a board member, we are concerned with growing an industry that's healthy. We want people to be successful. I do not want to see turnover in our industry of people opening and then they're closing within 5 years. This is an opportunity for folks to build wealth. And what does that look like in your specific instance? That's what I'm saying. You need to figure out in your business plan what that looks like. I see you writing, but I see your hand, but I need you to write it down.
Come up as you go, because this is important. What you just mentioned, restaurants open and close. I'm part of the food and beverage industry. Yeah. They're not as heavily regulated. They sell alcohol, and even with the most appropriate knowledge and teams, they still fail. They need help after the fact, and I don't hear the help.
So let me be clear. There is help. So I was in restaurant, beverage, whatever you want to call it. I had a coffee shop for about 10 years. So there are spaces where we can get help if you are in an industry. It does not have to be specific to cannabis. So what I also need people to do is to think broadly. Like, how many folks are thinking that they're going to open a retail shop and sell cannabis products, but they don't know what's happening in beverages? Or they think they're going to sell cannabis products, but they don't know what's the market trends in candy and confectionery. Or you think that you're going to offer a consumption space, but you don't know what's really making money in the New York experience. Business it's not just cannabis. We're talking broad business. And I just left a women's summit that was just talking about what are your legal ramifications, your marketing concerns, compliance, what was the other thing? How does the media impact you? Like, these were the things that they were talking about, because that's really these are real general concepts. And these are the general concepts that, say, like a SCORE executive at the library can walk you through, no matter what industry they've come out of. I sat with a SCORE exec when I was writing my business plan. That person had never run a retail space in their life, but they were able to walk me through some of the concerns that I had with just having employees that I was responsible for, and what my liabilities were to that person or persons, because I was hopeful to have 5 employees when I started. So those are the kind of questions that I think that you're hitting the nail on the head, and that's exactly what the council member is talking about when she says that the city might need to make a larger investment. We have an opportunity to help businesses, but I also want people to know and understand everybody doesn't want to own and operate a business because it's a lot of work. So some people do want to be employees. So how are we helping to pipeline? Our Department of Labor is already set up a number of job trainings as well as specific cannabis listings so that people can help transfer their skills. Surprisingly, in my conversations with some of our medical operators, I learned that they really like folks that come from construction with OSHA training, because those people know and understand what it is to maintain a compliant space, and it helps them to meet their goals. So we need to start thinking really broadly about how we are pipelining and affording people opportunity, because everyone is not going to open a business. Everyone does not need to be in retail. We have lots of makers in our communities. What does it look like to empower our small processors and manufacturers, and what kind of spaces do they need? We have an old Pfizer building in my community. That's where makers go, and they happen to be mostly in a food space. But what does it look like in Queens, Manhattan, the Bronx? Do we need special buses to get to those locations? Get into the Navy Yard is hard in Brooklyn, if you live where I live. So I'm just gonna say, like, there are some of those kind of conversations that we need to have, and we might be able to come up with solutions so that we can find spaces. We have some of our industrial parks that are already planning what it would look like to host cannabis campuses. And they want to support small businesses, and they want to partner with the larger businesses on those campuses. It's happening. We need you to make sure that you're engaging, and especially as a community board, your one job as community board is community planning. So what does it look like for your community? Have that plan and be able to articulate it. That's really what the challenge is in this moment. You don't want to wait until 18 businesses have come to you to decide that you want to have something to say. Say it, plan it, and then articulate it every time you get the opportunity, because that's really what's going to make the difference.
If I may, I just real quick, I just think to the point that she made, it's important to realize, and folks that have been small business owners, more than half of small businesses fail, right? And it's important, like the worst thing that we can do is encourage community stakeholders to go borrow money from friends and family, go get them the shirt off their back, and within 6 to 18 months, they're selling a distressed license, which is what happens across the country. And so, those are the kind of things that I think, we just need to be honest with our community, honest with ourselves, that maybe it's not for everybody to be an entrepreneur, to pursue a license. But to her point as well, there are things like, who's gonna create the next big brand? Who's gonna build the next point of sale system? Who's gonna provide what we call these auxiliary, non-plant touching businesses that can also be very profitable, right? And they're easier access and entry to those markets as well. And so, part of our responsibility is to educate folks on, hey, these are the array of businesses that are available to you. Who's doing installation for all these dispensaries and doing the design and build for all these places and construction? These are massive jobs. These are massive payouts, right? And so, I think the glamour and the sexy thing is, I want to go sell pot. But it's like there's so many more things that people can do in this industry that can really generate a healthy financial security. So.
Yeah.
And also, the secret about cannabis is once it's regulated, it becomes less sexy, right? It just becomes another industry that involves a lot of paperwork. And the sooner we appreciate that, the sooner that we really start to embrace the cannabis industry as just another part of life.
And I know
Absolutely.
I know we mentioned an investment, like the 4.8 sounds like a little, sounds like a lot. You're like, just make sure you pick up the garbage. It's not. There is room to take care of city services and programs and invest heavily in this industry. There is a potential, this is the number I have in New York City, for this to be a $1.3 billion industry.
It's still low, but I like it. It's still low.
I've just been informed we will have Chair Wright for a few more minutes. Yay.
She likes us.
Very
Likes us.
exciting. And I do want to talk about ancillary products, but we'll do
Okay.
that in panel two, because
Well,
ancillary businesses,
Oh.
cannabis-related businesses, like all the other stuff that's not flower-touching stuff.
There were a couple of things that folks said I don't think we explained right. Like, so like the real estate piece, like why is that such a complicated thing for cannabis, right? Like you want to talk about like the mortgages, the challenges of like, you can't just get any space, right? You want to talk about that, Chairman? Is that cool? Chairwoman?
So, as a board, we are very much aware that there are a number of challenges when people enter into this cannabis business and the cannabis industry generally. Because it is not federally legalized yet, people that have mortgages on their building may not be able to rent to cannabis or cannabis-touching businesses. And if you have your own building and you have a mortgage agreement, you need to be reading that agreement very carefully to make sure that you are not going to violate any of the provisions of the mortgage, because should you violate them and the bank chooses to enforce, they can demand payment of your entire loan amount. So that's one of the challenges. We know and understand that financial services is a challenge across the market. Everyone always says there's no banking. Let me be clear, there is banking. It's costly. And that's the challenge. It's the same way that say there's no mortgages in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. No, they're there. They're just more costly. So again, we're trying to address that, and we're working with our Department of Financial Services on this, because they are the arm that governs our banks. They're able to create the guidance. I know California just recently, or they're working on another piece of guidance, but they have a piece of guidance which has allowed a number of banks to gain a level of comfort so that they can participate in the market. New York has already issued a piece of guidance that was very similar to that. However, because we were not a legalized market, we had no players in that space. So we are re-examining it, and we anticipate releasing a new piece of guidance sometime soon so that we can help our financial institutions gain some more comfort. We cannot change the federal law. But what we can do is try to put systems in place that make it more palatable for our businesses to participate. So in some states, like I believe it was in Colorado, it started with credit unions. And then that credit union spun off a bank. And that bank is actually now about to come to New York City and New York State. So I just want, like, it's happening. It is not happening fast enough, because I know people need financial services. But in addition to traditional banking services, our Department of Financial Services is looking at what the full bucket of financial services could be for our businesses. And also, as you mentioned, POS systems. A number of what I'm going to refer to our fintech businesses are developing technologies to try to assist, one, the compliance for banks, and two, also the management of cash for our smaller businesses, so that they might be able to transact business without touching as much cash, and also a better means for them to actually move money throughout the system.
Yeah, so this is a market that really rewards creative and elegant solutions to tough problems, and so the financial one is one of them. I think we keep talking about 280E. 280E, for those folks that don't understand 280, 280E is a federal tax code that was used to get Al Capone, actually. And what it said was, even if you earn revenue off of illicit activity, you still owe the feds taxes. You can rob a bank, you can sell drugs, but you still got to pay the feds those taxes, right? And that's what 280E says, and that's why we keep talking about it, because what it does in some respects is almost create a 90% tax rate for these businesses where they're not really bringing home any revenue.
So to drill down on that, the tax code actually says if you have expenses that are in connection with your illegal business, you can't deduct them. But what ends up happening is, depending on where you are on the chain, in the life cycle of cannabis, you might be able to make adjustments to the cost of goods sold, right? And so you can offset any kind of federal prohibition on you taking normal tax deductions that any other business would. And so, as you heard mentioned, the chair said that New York undertook and passed a law that said 280E is not going to impact at the state level, which is great. Unfortunately, we pay most taxes at the federal level, so it's still a burden until the federal government gets on board.
Oh, we got a question here. It's a follow-up on the application process. Can you apply for more than one license at a time? And if one is rejected, is there a refund?
So we haven't issued the application costs yet, nor a refund policy. But I'm going to probably go out on a limb and say, do not submit more than one application at a time, because one of the questions that is on there is, in the past, at least in the applications that we just issued, is do you hold any other licenses? And so if you got a license, and I don't know, maybe you're going to be really quick and on the ball and you'll be able to pull them back and say, I don't want you to process those. But what you don't want is to submit an application with inaccurate information. Or that could become inaccurate during the process. So I will say that is probably not the strategy to just apply for every application. Every license type, but really to be strategic and to submit your application in full faith. And please, I know that there's a lot of apprehension around the rollout of the cannabis industry in New York State because we're watching what has happened across the nation. But I'm asking people to please be patient with us as we work through this rollout with you, because we really need your input and your good faith to work in hand with ours. And we really do not anticipate trying to create hurdles and obstacles for entry. This is really about having open access. And in order for us to do it, our partners have to be aligned with us. And so that's what we're really asking community. Submit your applications, full faith. Know that we will process in a timely manner and we will get you a response. There are opportunities to cure built into the existing application process. I can't anticipate why we would not afford any other applicant the same opportunity. So we want to make sure that people are able to achieve their desired goals. And it is not a race to the bottom. So we really want to keep people just hopeful, optimistic, and knowing in full faith that we are trying to operate as good players as well.
Can I ask a question, two-part question? As a processor and manufacturer, will I be able to sell to the medical dispensaries in 2022, 2023? What's the projection?
No, those two. So we have a medical program and we have an adult use program, and the twain shall not meet. So what I want you, right, thank you. So you understand what I'm saying. We're keeping that separate. And the reason for that is because, as it was already identified, those are big players, and those big players would eat up and gobble up an entire industry just with their presence in it. So to be able to say that suddenly we're going to just open it up and you can sell to them, that without it being timed, without us measuring how that would impact the market, is just unacceptable. And so we are not saying that. And we currently have a medical program and we are rolling out an adult use. And just to be clear, medical operators are not allowed to participate in adult use until they have an adult use license. That means everyone talking about, oh, they're just going to come in. You must be able to read the tea leaves and know more than everybody else, because at this point they have no designated time frame for when or how they will be able to apply. We have not rolled out adult use licenses, and as been indicated already, we have a mandate for equity and inclusion. And that is what is being prioritized in our process. So I do believe that down the line, there will be opportunity for medical program participants to participate in adult use, but under our law, they are not prioritized, and we must honor the law, and we are obligated to effectuate the law that has been passed.
Thank
I think
you.
two things in the law I think are interesting is the law actually says, MRTA says that they shall at some point actually expand the medical program.
Shall at some point means
Well, they shall expand the medical program at some point. I think what's interesting to the chairwoman's point is, we tout the adult use program as one of the most equitable, diverse programs potentially in the country. But when you look at our medical program, there is no diversity in that program at all, right? And so I think there does need to be a commitment from the state to actually add diversity to that program, and that will make a marked difference on the ability to serve, different communities. I think that's something, and I think that's a commitment that folks believe in very much.
And I realized earlier I said MWBE, which is kind of like a habit when you're in this space, and that's minority and women-owned business enterprises. I know a lot of us know that, but just know that that is also an initiative by the city to be more inclusive. The city does not really meet the goals that it sets. It's really trying. They're trying to accelerate this type of program within that. But that is why if you have questions, I realize that there are like fancy consultants and there are people that have, applied for business licenses in the past, but you can also go to your local elected official. We're not gonna sit there, maybe hold your hand while you fill out the application, but we will refer you or get you that person that will help you with the process along the way.
And in their defense, right, like, you guys understand from a sequencing standpoint here, even if they issued 150 or 200 retail licenses tomorrow and gave those out, what are these guys gonna sell, right? Like, we're in a market where there's a supply constraint, a supply problem. Last year, the state only legally grew 26,000 pounds of weed. To meet the demand of an adult use market, you're talking about upwards of 3 metric tons, and you don't just flick a switch to provide that, right? And so from a sequencing standpoint, that's why they issued these hemp growers now have cultivation licenses in THC. Hopefully we'll expand more, grow, and build the infrastructure to supply that. But you can't just start opening up retail locations without product to sell. And so these guys are working, again, give them the patience, give them the time to do it, because there's an important sequencing process here.
Also, I get the sense that there are a lot of legacy participants in the market out there tonight. Hi. Thanks for coming. I also, I spend no short amount of time talking to people who are in our historical legacy market from being truly upset about the way, or at least the initial regulations have rolled out. It's not the sexiest license, I don't think, to me. It is an important license, I think, to kick off the cannabis industry, to start those dollars. But to Jesse's point, the cannabis that's going to be initially sold is going to be grown outdoors. And those are the conditional hemp growers that are now allowed to grow. And they're getting, I see at least one farmer in the audience tonight. And that's to get seeds in the ground or in the audience. Look beneath your seats, everybody. Just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. You get a bag, and you get a seed, and you get a seed. No, just kidding, just kidding. Anyway. No, but yes, I'll be around the corner all night. Drinks $5, no, just kidding. In all seriousness, these licenses are going to be selling something that's been grown outdoors. New York doesn't necessarily have the best growing weather. Also, they're going to be predetermined. And I think that's largely something that has been missed, right? We've talked about this $200 million fund, and that's going to be administered by DASNY. That's going to help the first 100 to 200 licensees build out their spaces, because if you're in the cannabis industry or you've ever learned anything about it, build-outs are expensive. And that means they're gonna be at predetermined locations. These locations will be landmark locations, possibly, but they're not necessarily going to have the look and the feel of legacy that has been around for a while. Everybody also, first thing that legacy wants, they want to start on their branding, because they're known for their branding. And so that particular type of branding may not be immediately available. This is I still think that there's a distinct second mover advantage. And so this is to encourage everyone that if you don't necessarily fit in the very narrow door frame that's been created by these initial regulations, don't worry, because it's not the best thing in the world. It's a license, and it's gonna start it, but it's not, it's not that you're going to be set free to do whatever you want. There are structured loans that come along with it.
And If I may, I was peeking at some of the
Yes.
questions that came
Go for
up.
it.
I do have to get ready and leave, so I'm hopeful to touch upon a few of the questions that I've seen come across the table. And one of them was, can someone who has a legacy, who's been in the legacy market, break through into the legal space? In the note says, I can't have that on my resume. Yes, you may, is number one. I want to be clear, we are not in a position to penalize those who have participated in and/or been arrested and/or convicted or served time related to their participation in what was previously an illegal marijuana space. However, I do want to be clear, that's for people who have convictions and charges and interactions before March 31st, 2021. Not those who decided to open up their doors 2 days ago and decided to try to break through and create cracks in a system that is developing at this moment. And as everyone has identified, we have a mandate for equity. We are prioritizing, the one type of person that receives priority under our law are those who have been convicted of marijuana and marijuana-related crimes. Thereafter, we have a definition of social equity, which includes those who come from communities that have been harmed, MWBEs, distressed farmers, and service-disabled veterans. So it's very clear that there is a mandate for us to make a way for folks to participate in this industry and whom we must prioritize. So I know very often I'm in rooms, people say, oh, you didn't give it to Legacy. I am giving what the law says for us to give, and that means if you have been harmed and you do not have had to have been in the industry to have been harmed, then you need to be part of our social equity consideration. And so that's the way we need people to think about what it means to participate in this new industry. It doesn't mean that if you participated in what was then an illicit market that you definitely have space. And you definitely have skills, and you definitely have a book of business that somebody probably wants access to. So what I want you to realize is that you are valuable. We identified it, we see it, we acknowledge it, and we can't wait for you to be a part of this regulated space. Because also part of my job is to grow the industry. But I want to be clear, like I say that a little cheeky, but you're part of the industry. You're part of the experience in New York City. And we need you to know that there is space for you. Do you have to share that this is your experience base? No, you don't. Because there's no requirement that you have an experience base in order to get a license. If you decided you want to use Granny and Grandpa's land to start learning how to cultivate, then that's what you're applying for a license to do. Every dairy farmer didn't come from 5 generations of dairy farmers. Somebody was generation 1, or I should say generation 0. So you can be generation 0. But if you are not generation 0 and you are actually generation 1, 2, 3, and 4, there's still space for you. Also, we had people that were asking about micro licenses. A micro license is one of the license types that was already identified. And if you want to have a further conversation, I'm going to ask that you answer some more questions about that. But that allows you to put seeds in the ground and to dispense your product. Not everybody else's, but your product. And then we wanted to know, when is the funding for other license types become available? We currently do not have a schedule for that, but these are aspirational goals. It's something that we want to meet.
Wait, I got one.
Okay.
All right, so, I don't know if you guys can hear me. What is the OCM strategy for, thank you. What is the OCM strategy for gray area operators who are currently selling cannabis illegally and gobbling up prime real estate? It seems like they're getting an advantage over New York legacy operators and social equity applicants who are compliantly waiting for their turn to apply for a license.
Again, these are the people who are in your community that you know their names and addresses and that you should be keeping a track of. And that's, no, it can't be more clear. You know who are good players in your community. I sat on a community board for 14 years. No one accepts your power. And own it and utilize it. So if you don't like these operators, it's a way for you to handle it. And you can let us know how you've determined that you wanted to move. And we will listen. But I'm also going to say that as the OCM, as the Cannabis Control Board, we are not calling the police. At this moment, we are moving away from a criminal action. We are not trying to engage the state police to come down and raid their space. We are trying to do fines, we're doing letters, and thereafter tax will come in and do fines. But more importantly, this is your community. No one own it. You know, I promise you, I walk into spaces, a new store opens up a gate in my neighborhood, I walk in. Because I want to know what they do. And a couple of them are selling things that they should not be, and I clearly identify who I am and what they need to pull off the shelves.
Oh my goodness.
And I make no apologies for it. I make no apologies for it. Because I live there, and I want my community to be safe. I don't want the teenagers in my neighborhood running into their store grabbing stuff that they shouldn't have. We all know a number of stories of young people getting access and using way too much of product and having really bad outcomes those afternoons when they make their way home. And so you know and you understand, and you wouldn't be a part of this board and spending way too many hours outside of your house if you didn't care. So continue to care and let us know how you care and do this. This engagement is really important. Education is first. We are thereafter going with cease and desist letters, and bad behavior after March 31st is something that we must consider in the application process. So I really want to be clear. When we talk about legacy people and folks who've been in the business and people who are transitioning, that is pre-legalization. We're having a conversation about pre-legalization, not somebody that's opened their doors and decided to do some bad acts on March 31st, 2022. Then they got caught now, I guess, didn't they? And this is the look at the law. We are giving forgiveness to people who were during prohibition, not after legalization. So people need to listen. I'm not saying that the lift is easy, and I'm not trying to pretend that I can run anybody's business. But I am going to be clear that we have a job as a state to create regulations so that we can transition people into a safe, product-tested environment, and that's what we're trying to do. So no, we cannot give a runway path to people to just run however they feel like going. We have to put some brakes on it, and this is it. And so someone choosing to operate in this moment will face repercussions. It just so happens that the first set of repercussions will be financial fines, and it'll be administered by tax and finance. So we don't believe that just because it's a fine and not going to prison that it's not impactful. We do believe it's impactful. And more importantly, we do rely on community to give us a statement with every licensee's application. That is a powerful tool. I know that in each of these communities, you have stopped a license from being issued, and you have helped a licensee to receive their liquor license. In this case, I'm talking about liquor. The same thing has happened for us in Brooklyn, and it's because of the advocacy of community. And so I really want to empower people to take that advocacy seriously and to make sure that their voices are heard and that they have an organized structure in their community boards so they have a way and a means to process these requests.
I have a follow-up on that. How much weight will the community board recommendations have at the state level?
So it's probably very similar to liquor, to SLA and how we deal with liquor, because think about it this way. The idea is that we want to afford people opportunity to get licenses. We want to hear honest concerns. Just, I don't like that applicant is never enough. But when someone submits, for example, I would say in my community, when I was the board chair, I even sat on economic development, which processed our requests. When we submitted an application or a letter that said, we are offering a letter of no support because of these reasons, and it might have included constant wrongdoing, being a bad neighbor, noise complaints, sales to people that were underage or overselling, like they were just consistently bad actors. Those were the things that weighed heavily and helped us to stop a particular applicant from receiving renewals or a new application. So I think that it's similar. It's not enough just to say, oh, we don't think they should be there, but to really have legitimate concerns that are backed up with reasonable responses. So, because the question is gonna be, why should we deny this person an opportunity to pursue their dreams, to operate in this new industry? You have to have a reasonable answer if you want us to deny that right to someone.
I didn't know
So
you
my
were
only
listening
caveat-
to SLA licenses when you were community board.
We most definitely did.
I did
We
too.
did-
I did
we-
too. It's a lot. It's a lot.
I'm gonna tell you, we did a city plan. We were like one of 3 that did our community planning when Bloomberg was actually allowing them to be done. We listened on SLAs. I brought myself up to 125th Street so I could be there in person sometimes. We were engaged. And I know, because I was just telling Carlina that I am on her mail list, and I'm also on CB3's list because it's the other CB3. I see the work that people are doing. I see how you engage. So I know that you do the work already. I'm just saying to make sure that you keep track and you let us know, and that reasonable concerns will be heard. But it is not enough to just say we don't like them.
So look, my only caveat, and I hope you'd agree with this, is I think if we're truly committed to social equity, to getting black and brown people into this market, we don't want to create another step on the ladder, that would be another cost prohibitive measure, right? And for folks that understand, like, yes, the community board process is important, but sometimes you got to hire an expert or a lawyer to go through that process. That's another $50,000, $70,000 and more.
They're charging you too much.
Right. The point is like my point is like I'm totally supportive of community input, but not at the cost of creating another obstacle for black and brown and like folks.
It does not cost
wouldn't-
you that much. Most community boards ask for a copy of your application and for you to show up at their meeting and to articulate the reasons that you want to operate a business in that community. That doesn't cost you anything extra, and you don't need a lawyer to be there. So if somebody's charging you $100,000 to show up at a community meeting to get a part of the application that is necessary, then there's a problem. And you need to reevaluate that relationship from that person that thought it was appropriate to charge you that much money for it. And if that's the case, y'all paying $100,000, I might need to go and get that job. No, I'm just saying. I'm just kidding. But I'm just saying that that's a reasonableness concern that businesses should have. What's going on?
So I meet the regulatory factors on the social equity side with being incarcerated for marijuana with a conviction. Also,
So I'm going to stop you right there because I make decisions on applications. I don't want you to talk to me about your situation. I want you to ask me a general question.
are you allowed to have 3 spaces? So this is the technical.
So how many licenses are you allowed to have? How many retail spaces are you allowed to have? I see somebody poised. Go ahead, jump in.
3.
There you go.
And each,
That's
so
it.
sometimes the licenses can have, you can have multiple locations under one license. That might be for cultivation or for manufacturing. However, for social consumption and for retail, it's license per location.
So you got 3 licenses. And at day 1, you can have 3 spaces.
If that's on your application. However, I'm going to be honest with you. Very few people are going to have the mobility to say they're ready to roll out 3 locations. So I think the more common answer will be that a operator has success with one, and then they're ready to open the next and the next. But yes.
I don't know if I should keep going. If I secure 2 locations right now, and
So you're talking about your specific case, and I'm not going to talk about your specific case because I make decisions on licenses, so we don't want to have that conversation. All right.
And there are so many people who wrote their questions down.
Yes,
I'm gonna
let's get to
back
that.
those. I have a question. It's to the point that you touched on and that Jess just touched on as well. I've been sitting here festering about it. Community boards are made up of, common average Joes. And there are some, not everybody has the same opinions of marijuana as they do of liquor. And people who come in for a liquor license or people who come in for a marijuana license aren't necessarily going to present themselves like those who come in for a liquor license. We see a lot of people,
in suits and things. Maybe somebody wants to wear joggers if they're opening a.
All I'm gonna say is, we're community.
Is there gonna be any, I guess, guidelines and/or education for community members to be able to move past their unconscious biases about?
So I'm gonna say the short answer from the OCM is no. However, the city might wanna engage with their community boards on unconscious bias, because if community boards are writing us a letter to say that they do not support an applicant because they showed up in joggers, that letter is not going to carry the same weight as a community board that said, we don't support this applicant because the lack of business experience or something that is actually related to the business. And so bias I guess it will bear poorly upon the community board sending us a letter that's riddled with bias accusations versus legitimate business concerns. So I guess that might be the best way to say that.
Well, yeah, we say on the mandate, I guess, for equity, because people will come up with other reasons. They won't say joggers. They'll say something else.
I'm sure.
You know, so.
But then we got the tech CEO with the hoodie on, but he gets in. Let me just say this, because I want to answer your community board question, because I was also on my community board listening to liquor licenses till 1 a.m. sometimes, wondering why am I doing this? But it was because I thought that position and those conversations and hearing from people that legitimately wanted to contribute economically and maybe even fulfill some lifelong passion was important. So there's a couple things we can do as a city. One is absolutely, we can engage in like a series of trainings where we're trying to identify, bias, and it happens in our healthcare system. It happens in every single industry, and that's because essentially our society was built on institutional racism, and that's something that we have to grapple with. Okay. The second thing I would say is that when we think about what we can do as legislators besides fund these programs, we can actually legislate some of these things, and we don't want to hit you with too much because sometimes we tend to tinker around the edges and it's not worth it. But something like maybe expanding at some point after we get through comments, after we figure out what works, maybe we expand the definition of a justice-involved person, maybe. I'm working on legislation in the city level to figure out how we can get more people access to supportive housing who are justice involved, but there are constraints with what currently is on the books. And then in terms of other legislation, I mean, there's things that we could explore together, but we could certainly make sure that when it comes to technical expertise, trainings, that's something that we have an obligation and a duty to provide and make sure that you all feel well-resourced.
Hi. We have been joined by Damien Fagan. Damien, please tell us a little about yourself and what you do.
Testing. You got me? Yeah. Hey, thank you for having me, everybody. And I want to give it up for the chairwoman right now because, a year ago this month, I was anticipating, a lot of us were anticipating fighting the state tooth and nail to have these conversations. And they're coming directly to us and they're saying the things we want to hear. And so I just want to clap it up for the chairwoman. So yeah, my name is Damien Fagan. I was a hemp farmer in the Hudson Valley. I've been growing cannabis and CBD for the last 6 years. I teach cannabis horticulture at Medgar Evers College, the first cannabis horticulture class in the city. And I work at the HOPE program in Sustainable South Bronx. We are building a cannabis workforce development program out of our office in the Hunts Point and prepping people for jobs in dispensaries.
I wanted to go back. Just to the question that you asked. I think it's important on education. Like, there is generational trauma that exists in a lot of our communities around the war on drugs, right? Where we had nephews, uncles, cousins that were on the corner that were negatively impacted, and so there are, it is reasonable to understand some of the people in our community that have strong feelings, even if they're totally misplaced about this industry. I think to the point is, if I told you, hey, every time you open up a dispensary, crime drops by 22% in that local area, Would that surprise you? Every time you open up a dispensary, opioid overdoses drop by a dramatic percentage in that community, right? These are the kind of data point stats that I think we need to empower our community with to understand. This is not, we're taking something that was on the corner that we can put into the corner store, and there can be a lot of benefits in that as well. And so I think we need to spend time educating. I think there's value in that, to your point, absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Dream job or what? It's hard work. Can we just say thank you to Mar one more time?
Thank you, Mar.
Okay. Let's get back into it. Well, you know, we had all these questions written down and pre-submitted questions, but now you guys are curious, very. So, actually, I have a pot here that I know. Yeah, the ones that say DF on them. All right. Can people legally grow for personal use now?
Not yet. So the first group of people who will be able to legally grow are medical patients, right? And so the latest turn of the medical regulations came out recently. I think it's in its last commentary period. Audience, keep me honest if you know. So that's another 45-day period. Then once it's passed, medical patients can grow, and so can their caregivers. There's a limit around that. There's you can grow up to 6 plants per household, or per person. Those are 3 immature plants, 3 mature plants, and there can be a total of 6 immature and 6 mature per household. 18 months after the first legal adult use sales in the state of New York. I don't think that includes actually under the conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses we discussed. But 18 months after that, adults who were over the age of 21 can engage in home grow. Now, your individual house or your apartment building may have restrictions around that. The community in which you sit also can have some guidance around that, but they can't make it so difficult that you're unable to grow.
I just want to say, too, that home grow was such a huge win for people, for the community. There was so much money spent on fighting home grow in other states. This empowers people to have a personal relationship with the plant. It's not about sort of the speculative nature of cannabis that we see in the news every day about how much money companies are going to make. You can grow in your apartment. You can share what you grow with your friends and family. It's just an amazing victory for the consumer.
Thank you, Damien. Do you guys want to ask some questions? We had our second list, but here, take some of these.
I actually wanted to, I wanted to.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh. You sure? Okay. The borough president is here.
It's a borough president.
Borough President Mark Levine.
Well,
former
council member Mark Levine, representing Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, home of PIF, as we know.
What am I doing? I'm taking center stage right here. What?
Seat, please.
Then he feels like you gotta stay, you know? I got you. I know it's that.
We're good? We're good? All right. I feel like I should do some stand-up comedy here to lighten the mood. I am very briefly want to tell you how excited I am by the possibilities, a once-in-a-generational possibility to create economic opportunity in communities and for people who have been denied it for too long. I know this is complicated, and that's why I'm so thrilled about tonight. So thrilled that you came out here and that this incredible array of leaders has shared their knowledge with you. First and foremost, you've gotten to spend time with my phenomenal colleague, Carolina Rivera, who is awesome. You've gotten to see community board leaders, community boards 1, 2, 3, and 4, who have all, these boards have really exerted themselves to make sure that Lower Manhattan downtown has the information that your neighbors, that these communities need. I want to give a huge shout out to a mi hermano, Jesse Campoamor, who is one of the smartest, most decent, most hardworking people I know, and has been leading on cannabis from day one, and it's just been an incredible source of support for me. To the phenomenal Mara Fitzgerald, oh my gosh, a one-woman tour de force on this and so many other issues. You don't know, this is not the only issue that she leads on. Education really is her number one vocation. But I'm grateful to you for what you've done to center equity in this discussion. There are dozens of states that have already created a legalized cannabis industry. And they have all made very big promises on social equity. Almost none of them have fulfilled those promises. Turns out that this is really hard. New York City, New York State has to do this right. We have to be better. We have to fulfill the promise of economic opportunity in this new field. It's going to be hard. Starting a business under any circumstance is extremely difficult and complicated. Starting a regulated business is much more difficult. And starting a business in a field where the federal government considers it illegal, where banks may or may not lend, is even harder still. So we're going to have to do the work to empower entrepreneurs, to empower communities here downtown and elsewhere to succeed, to get them access to capital, to get them all the technical assistance they need, to help them write business plans. I want you to know that my office is going to do everything in our power. We're going to use all the resources at our disposal to support you, to support entrepreneurs, to support this emerging industry, to help you navigate land use issues, to help you navigate financial issues and regulatory issues. So you have an ally in the Manhattan Borough President's office. That's my promise to you. Thank you. So that's it from me. I'm going to now sit down and listen and learn with all of you. Thank you all so much.
Let's hear it again for the Manhattan Borough President.
Oh, give it up.
Yeah, oh, go for it. Yeah. The growing one. I had a whole bunch of growing ones for you.
There was a question about
methods.
about when folks should expect to be able to grow in the city, and there's just something that we should all understand about cultivation in New York City. And I talk about this every day. I just taught my class tonight to 14 kids who live in Brooklyn who want to grow, and some of them are already growing in their house. Some of them are in Legacy. Some of them are studying to be nurses, but cultivation opportunities are going to be limited in New York City just because of the real estate challenge. And so people need to understand that there's a lot of real estate upstate that you just can't compete on the price on warehouse space. And so, it's going to take a lot for us to see profitable, sustainable cultivation businesses popping up in the city. And I think one of the things that I've been slowly getting my students used to is the idea of moving upstate if they actually wanted to grow. I did it when I grew hemp. I was in the Hudson Valley and I commuted every day from Manhattan to the Hudson Valley to grow. I don't recommend that, but it's a beautiful state. There's a lot of places to grow, and I just want to make clear that there will be definitely warehouses. There probably are warehouses in Brooklyn growing weed, but there will be regulated ones eventually, just not very many, and that opportunity will mostly take place upstate.
I mean, and I think Damien would agree with this, and tell me if I'm wrong, but look, because New Yorkers have a certain expectation about the quality of flower that they consume, right? Like, outdoor flower will not be the flower that you can put on a shelf, put in glass, that New Yorkers will expect to consume. We expect
Unless
to consume
it's at one of the initial adult
we
use.
expect to consume a high quality.
Greenhouse and indoors better, but we
a
gotta
high
get
quality.
there.
But my point to you is it's very, wait, guys, let me finish my point, and then you can tell me I'm wrong. in order to produce the kind of quality of flower that most New Yorkers will potentially expect, it's extremely capital intensive, right? You're talking about these indoor grow house operations that are highly controlled environments, pumping CO2, controlling all these elements. Guys, to build these sites, you're talking about $350 to $400 a square foot to build these indoor operations, these grow houses. That's extremely capital intensive, right? And so, although it's something that folks want to do, it's probably one of the most expensive parts of being part of this industry. And I think folks just got to keep that in mind. Furthermore, what happens when the federal government deschedules and this thing opens up and we're competing against other states?
First of all, even when there is federal legalization, states will be protective of their own markets for a couple of years. So I don't think we should scare people from entering into this industry because, and let's face it, we're probably not going to see federal legalization anytime in the next, maybe five. And even then, I still think that there will be protective bumpers around New York's industry. So we have a longer on-ramp than that.
I do want to quickly defend outdoor flower. I think I think that there really should be a goal in New York of eventually transitioning our cannabis cultivation practices outdoors. It should not take this much carbon dioxide to grow a plant.
So we grow once a year? We just go one cut a year with outdoor? Is that what you're
That'll be
talking about?
carbon capture. We can talk about that on another panel.
No, definitely, but we just
once-
need better genetics. We need more training. We need more knowledge around. It's going to take years, obviously, but they do grow smokable flower outdoors in California. I mean, they have drier climates what's that? It's a different climate. That's why I say we need.
Let them defend the outdoor flower.
No.
and let's-
The genetics that exist right now are for outdoor California weather. They're not for New York outdoor, but there are hemp farmers, there are cannabis farmers upstate who are going to be working on growing outdoor genetics, smokable flower. That should be the goal. We're not growing coffee inside warehouses. It makes no sense. It's just a waste of energy.
That's just not economically viable, brother.
All right,
We only grow
so
once a year.
I feel
We
like
only grow
it's a little subjective. There's some truth in the carbon emissions that come from like brick and mortar actual buildings. These are all facts. But I think, it's growing. We're growing.
It's a transition,
pains.
yeah.
It's a transition. There we go. So we only have, right, like 10 minutes left?
They just said, let's say, try to get some more time.
We're gonna breeze through this. You mind if I read this?
So I have one of the other questions from the audience here.
Yeah.
When will banking legislation be passed
Woo.
to make cannabis, I think it's growers, safer and more legit?
Okay, so not anytime soon. If you've been, paying attention to banking, you probably know there's something called the Safe Banking Act. That's been kicked around quite a bit, keeps passing at the House level. And people say, oh, this is going to allow the cannabis industry to be banked. Nope. Cannabis industry is already banked, as we've discussed. There are anti-money laundering procedures that cannabis banks who want to work with cannabis clients employ. And that's based on FinCEN guideline actually given by the federal government. What happens with SAFE is it gives banks comfort. They can get comfortable, but it doesn't mandate that banks bank the cannabis industry. And so what happens is, particularly when you're trying to underwrite an equity plan, and you look at something like safe banking, those communities that have been historically redlined by banking are not going to be picked up by safe banking. And so there is a lot of push for safe banking, but the fact of the matter is, and particularly in a state like New York that really held out for equity, I'm of the opinion, I'm sure there are people out there who won't agree with me, but you wait and you bring equity along with it. There's another piece of legislation, the MORE Act, which would actually descheduleize cannabis, right? And therefore, it would make banking cannabis completely legal with none of the caveats. Neither of these are going to pass anytime in the future. Thank you very much for attending my TED Talk.
All right, we have literally 5 minutes left. So, and then we all got to get out of here.
Okay, I've got a quick question from the audience. Can the OCM tackle the idea of cannabis paraphernalia? As a smoke shop owner, this has always been illegal. Water pipes, bowls get sold as tobacco accessories. The vape laws also need to be addressed. There are owners getting fined for flavored vapes, but it's just a strain name.
I think that would have been a better question for Chair Wright. So any questions we didn't get to answer tonight, we will do our best to follow up, and we will send, something out, a follow-up sheet with contacts, websites of everybody who was here tonight, and not personal phone numbers, but, you guys, there will be follow-up. We will answer as many of these questions as we can, and this is just the first of many of these meetings that we're going to be doing. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you all so much. Thank you, and thank you, Borough President. Thank you. And all the community boards and the reps from the community boards, Mariama, Leslie, Paul, you guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Mark. Good night, everybody.